From the Startup Experts community, this is the Becoming Better podcast, and I'm its host, Jesse Fries. Clay, it's amazing to sit down with you. So excited that we are doing this finally. I know a couple weeks ago we were traveling to Utah Tech Week in Salt Lake City, and we had meant to sit down, but our schedules just filled up as they tend to do. So really excited to spend some time with you. You'd mind introducing yourself?
Totally. Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. This is awesome. I'm glad we're making this happen. But yeah, my name's Clay Steele. I am on the go-to-market team here at HiBob. I'm also a leadership member of Startup Experts, helping impact the HR community, specifically HR leadership community within SUE. What else? I live here in Long Beach, from Orange County, and yeah, traveled the world a bit in between then and now. I've lived in Bangkok and New York, Mexico City, LA, and yeah, find myself here. Just got married last year, and yeah, really passionate about the subject that we have coming up today.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and we were doing some research on your background. Of course, I've gotten to know you personally as well as professionally in the last couple of years, and really enjoy our friendship. And was looking at, your background on LinkedIn, and you kind of call yourself an employee experience expert, which you are, dog foster, therapy advocate, ex-kid, which I think we all are, but, normally don't call that out. But before we go into this conversation, kind of wanted to understand from you, like the human behind the work. You shared some of it, but what shaped you as you think about people, connection, building trust, that, those are such key characteristics in our roles as sales individuals for our organizations.
Yeah, 100%. Well, at the end of the day, when I say ex-kids, I like to bring that in because it is the humanizing factor, right? I'm not ex-Deloitte. I'm not ex-Uber, right? I think it's cool to call out the fact that I'm human too, and I think we lose sight of that every now and again, especially in the corporate worlds. And yeah, I'd really chalk it up to my folks, just the way I was raised. Early in my life, I remember talking to my mom. She's an art teacher. She never made lawyer money, and she told me when we were talking about how she defines success that in her words it's defined by the impact that you make on other people's lives, and that's how she gets paid, is what she'll tell you, and that's what stuck with me over time. So yeah, I think a couple other things have helped shaped kind of this human element, I guess, that I bring to the table here. After college, I went to SF State. After college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I had a friend who taught English in Thailand, and they said they had a great time. And I thought, great, I want to go to Thailand and travel and make money. And so that's exactly what I did. And if I'm honest, I went not because I wanted to be a teacher, but because I wanted to travel and go to the beaches and all that good stuff. But yeah, within a couple of months, the script flipped on me when I was out there. I was in a very small town, Wangchan, has about 2,000 full-time residents. I had about 750 high school students, and yeah, it was real. I was sweating in this classroom, chalk dust on my pants, and I quickly learned these kids are looking at me because I'm their passport. If they learn English, their opportunities expanded, and I was the only person within miles that could help them with that. And that's also kind of something that I think has really influenced me in today's age. One interesting thing about Thai high school is students don't have to come to your class like they do in the States. So everybody who was in my class actually wanted to be there, and they could leave whenever they want, but they didn't. And so the responsibility hit differently. So it was after a couple of months of being there, I stopped traveling every single weekend. I stayed back to tutor and help families on the rubber tree plantation. I sat in floors in circles, eating with our hands, passing around a guitar, passing around Google Translate. And I think that's the quiet human moment aspect that I try to bring in to my day-to-day job here as I'm selling software. Same goes. I mentioned dog foster. Training's hard. Nurturing takes patience. Discipline matters, right? And there are a bunch of setbacks that happen throughout, but dropping that dog off in their forever home, that's the impact. That's the payoff. And like my mom said, that's really how I get paid.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that energy and passion you bring to that. I can imagine you'd be a great instructor. And if it's an opt-in, people have to show up to see you perform. I could see you have a full class every day. Ironically, my daughter and I just watched Good Morning Vietnam for the first time for her,
Great show.
multiple time for me. And if you recall, there's that section where Robin Williams goes into the class teaching English to Vietnamese and immediately gets into that performer shtick. And it's a really
Totally.
entertaining section. So that came to mind when you were talking about standing up in front of a bunch of Thai children.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
You would
Not
be
so
a nat
hard.
You'd be a natural at that. And I think that gets to an element I do want to talk about, which is building trust. We are in a trust building business, you and I, but yet, the data suggests that, which is hard to believe, that research shows only about 3% of buyers fully trust a sales rep. 3%.
I believe it.
And so, you already touched on this a bit about, building trust, building relationships with, the end consumer, whether that is a child in a classroom or, these days it's an HR tech buyer. But I am kind of curious when you approach the relationship building process, the sales process, like how do you go about building trust?
Yeah, totally. I think I have a couple of examples that I'll share with you. I actually texted some of the people who purchased from me in the past couple of years and asked them this question because I think the perfect example is, trust is in reality, rooted in reality. So I have some of that to share. But I often think of when you go to a restaurant and you tell the waiter all of the sea bass, and that waiter leans in and goes "Hey, what else were you considering?" And you tell them "Well, I was also looking at the short rib or whatever it may be," and they'll tell you go with the short rib, especially tonight. That's the right call. That's the component that I try to bring in to my situations, as I'm consulting with HR leaders. I think, salespeople get a bad rap because they just say, yeah, go with the sea bass. It's great because it's more expensive and I'll get paid more on the tip or whatever it may be.
Yep.
But yeah, I reached out to a couple of buyers of mine and some of the kind of indirect quotes there was I was direct, I was transparent about the tool. There weren't any surprises. A lot of sales folks say that they can solve all these little edge cases, but I was realistic in terms of where the maturity was each module and what was important. A perfect example is when we launched our ATS. Immediately, it wasn't fully baked out, right? Like any product is when you're
Sure.
going to market. And this particular buyer was we need to hire about 200 people within the next 6 months. And I thought to myself, this could really not just bite me and my reputation in the butt later on, but this might impact their ability to do that and execute against that plan. And so I told him point blank, hey, I think this product's pretty new, and given how much you're probably going to use it, let's bring in an Ashby or a greenhouse or somebody to take that component. We have great relationships and integrations with both, and so I think that's a key example, core example there. Another buyer that I texted this morning said that I treated their relationship like a partnership rather than a transaction, right? So
Yeah.
I actually asked, what does success look like, and listen to the constraints that they're dealing with internally. And I think that's the bar, I'm super open and upfront at the top of the call in terms of, what it is that you're trying to accomplish and what it is that we do in terms of our bread and butter. And then, from just a salesperson perspective, I think bad sales reps ruin it for some of the good ones, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah.
I always tell people, I'm not going to call you every 2 days. I'm not going to trap you in a 45-minute timeshare presentation when you jump on the phone with me. And if it's not a good fit, I'll be the first one to tell you, and I'll pressure test that. So I think trust dies in I don't know, exaggeration. But yeah, it grows in the realism. And again, those human moments, putting myself in your shoes as you're making not just a decision, but one that's going to impact every single person at your org.
Yeah, yeah. I have a follow up to that. I mean, you are one of the more successful, if not the most successful, representative at HiBob. So, congrats to that. Yeah, blush moment. But authenticity is important. You talked about trust, but yet you have a sales number. a buyer knows that you are motivated and have to hit a sales number. So, when you approach that conversation, yes, being very authentic, being very trustworthy, how do you balance the desire to put HiBob in the best possible light and, knowing that the HR leader that's buying you know that you are rewarded by closing the deal? Like, how
Mm.
do you look at those two dichotomies and address them?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's tough. Authenticity, pressure, balancing the gap there. I think like let's take the restaurant analogy. I used to work in a restaurant. I was a server at Bubba Gum Shrimp for 3 years up on Pier 39. And like here's what bad restaurants will tell you is like you have 2 hours to finish your meal, right? Like good restaurants understand that there's something deeper, right? Like good meals spark good conversations. There shouldn't be like a stopwatch on that.
Yeah.
And like that's the difference in my opinion between like performance and authenticity. Performance like will rush the table, right? Rush the sale, rush the deal. Authenticity like will create space. And it's not like when I say authenticity, what I don't mean is like oversharing. It's not personality. It's really like authenticity to me is like consistency under pressure. Right? Like I am who I am on this podcast, on sales calls, in executive boardrooms, at dinner with my wife, when my house flooded, when my grandfather's health was declining. Like the context shifts, the tone adjusts, but the core doesn't change, right? And I think like that's what performance looks like. You know it's not promising roadmap features that I can't control, or saying yes to everything, or disappearing after the signature. It's literally saying like I don't know the answer to your question,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
or even more so like that's not our strength. What you need and what's a core part of your evaluation is not what we would consider to be one of our our core strengths. And like this is going to require work on your side when it comes to implementation. Like you got to be prepared for homework, and like truthfully, you might not be ready yet, or I don't know if the team that you've brought together is necessarily going to help get you to that point. There might be people that we need to bring in externally, et cetera. So like I think the difference is whether you're performing confidence or practicing clarity. Like honesty scales and like hype expires.
Got it. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And, what I hear there is you're just being a human. Those folks that you're working with
Crazy.
are relating with you as a human. Somebody much wiser than me in the sales world once said, the best thing to do, and he used a very visual analogy. I'm a visual learner. He said, look, you're playing tennis, you're very much against each other. What you need to do is step over the net and be in the same court as your buyer. And really look at the problems, look at the challenges together, and then partner. So to that end, and something that we talked about in Salt Lake City that I'm always fascinated about is running a sales process. One of the unique aspects of both your life and my life is that we are working with HR buyers that, maybe in a long career, have run 10, 12 processes, usually much less. When they're looking at, whether in my case, employee benefits, or in your case, HR systems, they've probably done it a small handful of times. Yet, over a given couple of weeks, we've done it a dozen times. Over a year, couple hundred times. We
Totally.
have a lot of looks, a lot of experience. You've seen both good and bad in terms of how to run a sales process. So, the lead up here is I'm curious, if you were running a sales process, right, and you were the HR buyer, what do you think good looks like, and how would you do it?
Love this question. Okay, first I think like what makes a great HR buyer is like they're honest back. Like they don't give false hope. They're not dragging the process out to avoid discomfort. They'll tell you like squarely where you stand, right? And then I think like second, good HR buyers will surface the blind spots early. So like I've had a couple of experiences where CHROs, CPOs will say like, hey, this leader, our CFO, is going to torpedo this, right? Or like, this person over here is super skeptical and they bought one of these tools that we're aiming to replace. This is their baby, and we would be calling their baby ugly in this case, right?
Yeah.
They don't hide the political reality. They'll actually like bring you into it. And then third, I think like really, really good HR buyers will take the time to build alignment, internal alignment, before they even take that first call with you. And like, what I mean by that is like everybody internally agrees, like, not only is there a problem, not only is it worth fixing, but if we don't, it's going to cost us time and money and potentially talent if we don't fix it, right? And I think like that's what changes everything. Those are, I'd say like those are, there's probably way more, but those are, I'd say like the top three things that I look for, like a good HR buyer or in general, regardless of what you're selling. And then on the other side of the coin, there's also bad buyer behavior as much as like bad
Yeah, yeah.
sales
Tell me
reps.
more, because those are a couple of those are coming to my mind.
Yeah, yeah. This is where it gets spicy, and hopefully I'm not offending too many people. But like, I think bad behavior buyer. I mean, it's bad behavior in general, right? I mean, it's, bad buyers will let the ego drive the process, right? They'll prioritize being right over solving the actual problem, or like they'll hide their biases or
Hmm.
withhold critical information that's going to help not just you, but them, right?
Yep.
Or even like treating vendors like dismissively, like I've had buyers like place the blame on me and my team for things that just weren't surfaced during, discovery. And is that partially my problem for not asking the right questions? Totally. But, there's no room to ask every single question on these calls. Otherwise, we would be in a timeshare, pitch, if you will. So,
Yeah. I think
yeah,
we're aligned on this. I mean, one of the things that I like to say when I'm giving a demo is ask all the hard questions, ask as many questions, because I would much rather, have that awkward moment of no, the platform can't do this, or, this is going to be a little harder, than to have that post sale and get into implementation and then have this, bad moment. So, how do you encourage HR leaders to ask the questions that you might not have a good answer for?
how do I encourage, say that one more time?
Well, I mean, in terms of like you want to put your product in the best light, but you also know that there's some weaknesses. And
Totally.
and so, trust, authenticity is super important. So you don't want to avoid and not bring, up a potential gap in the
Totally.
platform.
Yeah.
But also you don't want to, stew in it.
Yeah. I think like I think a lot of buyers when they see me or any sales rep on the other side of the screen or in person, like a lot of them in their head, they're like, this person's just trying to make a check, right?
Yeah.
And like bad sales reps like kind of create that skepticism truthfully, but like good sales reps kind of like earn their way out of it, if you will.
Yeah.
Buying well is leadership. Clarity is kindness. Accountability builds trust. So I think like yeah, in terms of the actual product itself, if there isn't a good fit or if it doesn't do exactly what it is they do, there's two paths, right? One is, well, if I tell them that, then I put myself at risk for losing the sale.
Hmm.
If I try to talk track my way out of it, I might keep the process going, but then it just creates friction down the line. And I think where I've moved away from being more of a transactional seller early in my career to where I am today, or where I'm trying to go, I guess I should say, is in those moments realizing telling them the truth right now will put me at risk in losing this deal. And it's not just being okay with it, it's like you being the one to surface that straight away, and creating that risk almost for yourself. But again, like HiBob pays my salary. My clients pay my commission, and that is a literal 50-50 split. So when I think of like who I work for, it's not just HiBob. It's not just my employer. It's equally, maybe even more so, the person on the other end of the line who's actually paying my commission check. And I don't know if buyers necessarily think of us in that way, as us sellers in that way, but like you employ me. I work for you, right? So if I'm telling you something that is going to blow up down the line, then I don't work for you, if that makes sense. Like I think what I try to look at myself as is not a seller. I'm a PM in your business, and this is a project that we are working on together, and I'm as invested in the outcome as you and your team if I'm doing my job right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I think it goes to something I've seen a number of times, working alongside you is you're building long-term relationships and
Totally.
trust, right? If a sale does not happen or a meeting does not happen next week, or even next year, that's okay. You are playing a much longer game because what you're representing might not be the right fit for
Totally.
the organization at their stage, might not be the right mix of things for the HR leader. Um, but being upfront and communicating that and partnering with them, will build you that loyalty so that when it is the right organization, it is the right mix, you've already established that trust.
Yeah.
One of my pet
Yeah,
peeves,
real
quite
quick.
frankly,
Let me push back on something that you just
yes.
mentioned real quick. It's the term long game that I think like perpetuates this like this is a salesperson first and a human second mentality. While it can be seen as playing the long game, like when I'm playing the long game, it's not because I'm like, ooh, they're gonna buy from me at some point. There's so many
Right.
people who are out there who I know their kids' names, I know what sports they play, I know what trips they have coming up. Like they've sent me books to read because it's impacted like these relationships that I'm building are first and foremost because I like building relationships and building
Hmm.
connection. People just happen to sit in a buyer's seat in a lot of these cases, but it doesn't mean that I'm performatively curious about their life because I think that there's some end result that I'm going to get from it in the form of currency or whatever it may be. I genuinely love, and for the folks who have worked with me who are listening to this, they'll know this. Like, I genuinely love sitting down and talking to you about who the heck you are. And I think, like, if you are ever on a call with me, what you'll know is like, we start with fun facts. We talk about our lives because at the end of the day, like, this can be so mundane, man. Like, I'm in my office. My office is a garage. You can't tell that because of my cool background. But like when the call ends, I'm alone. There's nobody else here. And so like I get little micro moments throughout the day to like actually create connection. And it just so happens that some of these people are buyers. You know what I'm saying? And I think like that's what I really get from this role and being in sales is I get to just professionally get to know people every day, all day, which that's what makes me tick. I love that aspect.
Yeah. No, I love that. And some of them do eventually become
Totally.
clients, which
Yeah,
is
well, they
great.
know what I do, right? They know what I sell. They know what my product does, and if I'm doing my job right, again, I'm not like you and I host these dinners all the time, these HR leadership dinners, and at these dinners, what I'll stand up and say first and foremost is, I'm not wheeling a TV out. You're not sitting through a demo. Matter of fact, I don't talk about HiBob. I
Yeah.
brought Betsy, or I brought Nicole, or I brought Kim here who bought Bob, and I've used Bob for a while. If you want to learn about the product, that's the authenticity right there. Talk to them because they'll
Yeah.
tell you the good, the bad, the manual. But I'm here to just, make sure that you all have that connection and you all are talking about what matters. And at the end of the day, people hit me up at the end of these events and say, like, we are on a platform. I don't want to name any of my competitors quite yet, but we're on a platform that we hate and that doesn't
Yeah.
work and it's broken. So, and our renewal is up in 6 months. I'll call you then, right?
Yeah.
So that I can get something going. I think that's the piece right there that kind of brings it back to my day job, if you will.
Yeah, no, I agree. And they want to have you in their life, whether that be as, somebody that's supporting them on the technology front or just a friend. Um,
Totally.
I was going to share a pet peeve of mine, which when I know a sales process has gone sideways, oftentimes it's not because I lose, and I do lose a lot, and that's just part of what we have to work through. But a
Totally.
lot of times, and you mentioned this already, you lose for the right reasons, right? Like it's just as you have conversations, you realize that, this actually probably is not the right platform or right solution for them today. And there are better options out there. And a lot of times we'll refer other options there. But where I know a sales process or that relationship has gone wrong, and this is where it breaks my heart, is when the individual doesn't tell me they've gone in another way, or in some cases they completely ghost, and I just don't get that closure. And for me, that's a reflection on two things. One, it's like, okay, what did I do in which I was building this relationship? I thought it was a two-way street. I thought we had something going on here. And then suddenly, boom, we're out of the process and I didn't even get word. But two, it also makes me question the individual that we've gone through this process and how they're running a process. And I'll have to admit, there's been a few times where, I've just stepped back and then given a call to that person and been like, yeah, you look, this is a learning moment for us all. I could have done better at X, Y, and Z, but please, next time you encounter a Jesse or a Clay, can you just close out the process? Because this is how I look at it. And I've shared that with colleagues before, and they're like, "You do what?" I'm like, "Well, this is just being human," which we talked about earlier.
100%. Yeah, I mean, you can even take this again back to the restaurant analogy. Like, you can tell so much about somebody by how they treat their waiter, right? We're in a thankless job, you and I. Like, sure, we make commission, but we also take on crazy high risk. And yeah, at the end of the day, when people treat their waiter like, hey, you serve me, and I'm not going to engage with you, or we've all seen this happen before, and we get that same treatment often where folks are like, you know what, it's easier for me to just not even reply and let them know. And if we're disqualified for a tech reason, I want to know that, because I want to bring that to my product so that we can start to fix that. But I've also had multiple buyers bow out of processes because of me. And they've told me this, like, hey, you were assumptive in this regard, or I didn't like how you framed XYZ and I wanted another sales rep, or whatever it may be. That's almost more important than winning for me, because, like, how the hell am I supposed to get better if I don't hear this stuff, and far from perfect, far from close to perfect. And so, yeah, like, I love that approach. I'm totally going to steal that from you. But yeah, I mean, it happens probably way more than people realize. It's not just the ghosting, it's the just like lack of being a human, I guess you can call it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that you have brought that up. I mean, I certainly have run at this point thousands of sales processes, and in my world, very small percentage are successful. I mean, I would like to improve that, but that's just the reality, as we talked about. What we represent is always not a good fit, and you and I are both benefit from great relationships, great network. So we have the ability to talk to a lot of people. So I would much rather be on that side of the equation than, a small subset of people that we're really trying to get to our number. Like that becomes artificial. But I share that, right? I too have had, individuals come to me mid-process and be like, you know what, I just don't think we're jibing here, right? And
Totally fair.
tell me more, want to introduce you to somebody else that potentially can tell the story better, can support you better. And you mentioned this earlier, it's that individual is buying somebody that they trust and wants a long-term relationship. So if we're lucky enough to work together, I want you to work with somebody that, is a better fit for your personality and what you need. And I think that's a sign of maturity, right? Frankly, on your part, of like recognizing that, taking it as a learning moment, but also realizing that, in this world, we don't get along with everybody. Like, our style doesn't match with everybody. And so you just have to appreciate that and say, well, as I think I'm perfect, the reality is I'm not. And there's a lot of learning that I have to do.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, the line between ego and feedback is a lot, thinner than people actually think. Like, one of my previous leaders gave me some of the best advice I've ever gotten in my life. And it's so simple that it almost feels like daft, but it's the feedback's the feedback, and you have to take it because it's valid. If somebody's telling you what it is, it's valid. And you have to try to find what's valid in it if you don't think it is even. And that's externally, internally, here at home with my wife, you know what I mean? Or amongst my friends. And if you're not collecting that, then you're in this cyclical kind of motion of everything I'm doing is working, right? Which just isn't the case. So, like, for the buyers out there, I encourage you, give feedback to the people who you're buying from, whether it's your sales rep or the engineer or your CSM or whoever it may be. If it's great, if it's good feedback, great. Like, that's easier to deliver, right? But what's hard is the not so great feedback. And that's where the growth happens. And that's where, again, back to my mom's line at the top of this call, like, the money is made, or the value rather, and success is made in terms of the lives that you impact. You have no idea how impactful just a really short bit of critical feedback would be in anyone's life, especially in the world that we live in, where we're constantly in situations where it's warranted, And so I encourage everyone out there, if you're listening, give the feedback, good, bad, ugly, nice. it's, people want that.
Yeah, no, that's right on. And in startup experts in particular, we refer to that as the gift, right? You're giving something of value to someone. Feedback is that, even if it might be a negative, but it is a nudge in the right direction for improvement. Interestingly enough, I mean, you shared your mother. Um, I actually met my wife, now wife, originally through an interview. I don't know if I talked about this before,
Had you?
and she didn't get the job, but she asked for a debrief. She wanted to know why, so she went back and asked for feedback on what she could do better. It wasn't for many months after that until we actually started dating. But that came to mind when you were saying, like, ask for feedback. Feedback is a gift. Like, that
Totally.
helps us all move forward. And in this case, ended up in a marriage and a couple kids.
Sounds like she did get the job at the end of the day.
Not that job.
Not that job.
Wanted to kind of bring us to the close. But one thing I am curious about, because you have a great perspective on this, is you do a lot of technology demos. You run a lot of sales processes. As I alluded to earlier, a lot of the people that you're talking to are not expert buyers, at least not to the extent, and
Totally.
they haven't seen the type of reps that you've seen and do see on a regular basis. What advice would you give an HR buyer as they're engaging with a sales rep, as they're going through this process? What type of questions should they ask?
Yeah. Oh man, there's so many. There's so many. But I think at the end of the day, it's like test your seller, right? Like one of my favorite questions that folks ask me, real good buyers will ask me is, what am I not asking you yet?
Yep.
It forces me to really dig deep and give you an honest answer. I think like inauthentic reps will be like, well, you haven't asked us about this module and I can sell you this one too, right? But like, I think when I'm asked that question, I try to, again, I put myself in their shoes and it forces that change of thought to put myself in their shoes and say like, well, you mentioned that you have a bunch of employees in Europe and Germany, and time and attendance laws are pretty strict out there. I think like we should probably explore kind of how you're running time and attendance out there as a very specific example. But like, yeah, ask sales reps what you're not asking them yet. Or I think like I've also had buyers ask like, why do people leave, Bob? Your customer
Mm-hmm.
retention rate's 97%. That's really accurate, or that's really impressive, rather. Um, but what are those 3% doing? Like, why leave? And
Mm-hmm.
if I'm answering the question honestly, it's well, they're going to Workday because they think that that's where they need to be on, or they get acquired by a company who doesn't want them on, Bob anymore, or whatever it may be. Like it's, they are asking these questions not necessarily so much for the answer as much as they are to see if they're working with somebody who's trustworthy. Another good one is like, okay, let's fast forward. I signed, where are my struggles going to be in the first 6 months, next 6 months and beyond? Can I get a hold of you? Or, if it hits the fan, where will you be? I think like these are questions, right? And it's in part to get the actual answer, but the other side of it, and maybe the most important piece, is to understand who's on the other end of this call, and who it is that you're working with. And then same goes for sales reps. If there are sales reps listening to this call, I think like something that we always need to keep in mind, and again, it's going to help our buyer, is from a question standpoint, what happens if we don't change or if you don't change? That is such a powerful question. And while
Yes.
I want to tell you I ask it on every call, I forget sometimes too. But if I'm doing my job right, I'll ask that. And it forces them to actually, again, fast forward 6 months, 1 year, 18 months to actually think of like, what's the impact? Is it gonna be compliance related? Is it gonna be, attrition related? And that's again kind of what helps you build the stakeholder group, involve the right people internally, and then as a seller, testing your buyer to understand like, are they thinking about this from a feature function standpoint and making this change, or is this
Mm-hmm.
materially going to impact the way that they do business, hopefully for the better. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. It's kind of two different types of questions, for both parties.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I'll throw in one in on both sides. I feel that a lot of salespeople focus on selling to the organization and not the individual, and so I often like to ask, to your point, like, what if this didn't happen? But also, why is this important to you personally? I feel
Totally.
that that's a real effective question because they're sitting there going, is this going to make my life better? How, am I going to be more strategic or am I going to be picking up all this administrative work? Like you sell to the person oftentimes, and that's a great question to hear from them. The other side of it is I love getting asked the question, tell me about your competition and how are you strong, how are you weak, or how are they strong and weak in particular, because you get to see the authenticity and the trustworthiness of that sales rep. Like,
Yeah.
never disparage your competition. And so, when you listen to a salesperson throw another competitor under the bus, suddenly you realize that maybe what I'm hearing from them about their product or service isn't factual either.
Totally.
Right? There's a solution for everybody, and so I would encourage an HR buyer to say, ask somebody, tell me about these three or four companies and what are your thoughts on them, and the HR seller that gives you a fair-handed advisory answer to that is somebody that you should lean in and listen to a little bit more.
1,000%. Yeah. I mean, I love analogies. So like take this in like a first date capacity. This might be kind of a bold question to ask on a first date, but like, tell me about your exes. Like what happened, right? And if they're like, well, they were crazy and it's all on them, then like that tells you so much. But if they're willing to be introspective and say like, well, I dropped the ball in a couple of instances and I wasn't really ready, I wasn't fully baked, as my wife would say when we started dating 14 years ago or tried to start dating 14 years ago and she shined me, you know, I think like, yeah, it's the accountability piece. It's how you talk about other people. Again, bringing you back to the human side of it. When people ask me about my competition, I'll tell them these platforms are great for this use case. And this is typically what I hear from my customers in terms of why they leave or why they didn't end up continuing to evaluate them. And like, here's proof of what I've heard people say publicly on LinkedIn about this tool, right? That's not my opinion. That's not me telling you like they're terrible or throwing them under the bus or mud on their name. Our job is to surface as many risks possible that help you make the most educated decision. And I also say this at the top of most every call that I'm on is I'm going to help you make a decision and build a business case. And you can use everything that I give you to build a case for a different tool. And I'm okay with that. My job isn't to sell you Bob. My job is to make sure you land on the right platform. And if that's not me, I'll leave happy, right? Not richer, right? But, again, like that's not the goal. And kind of going back to what my mom taught me super early is, it's all about impact over income. And I've had folks go to a different platform and I know in my heart, that's probably the best platform for them given their use case. Right. And I'll tell them I'm happy that that's the case and, check in every now and again or whatever it may be to make sure that they're getting what they need. But it's not about winning per se. I think like, and buyers can smell this from like a mile away.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is a great leaving comment. I want to appreciate you, Clay, for sitting down with me and sharing your wisdom. Thank you so much. I can tell why you are such an amazing salesperson, and I'm really grateful to have you in my circle.
Oh man, I appreciate it. And shout out to you, Jesse. You're building such a cool community, not just in SF, not just in California, all around the world, and the value that you bring to folks in your community, and whether that's startup experts or Sequoia or your personal circle, like, man, I'm trying to get like Jesse.
Thank you. That's
Of
a
course.
big group hug.
I got you. Thanks, man.
Thank you for listening to this Becoming Better with Startup Experts discussion. If you're interested in learning more about our community and perhaps joining, please visit www.startupexperts.us.